and Nasrallah played, that they intervened in Syria, and that how can they claim to be defending dignity and liberation when they took sides with the Assad regime in Syria in a war against the Syrian people? This is something I've seen bubbling up in the last few days, and I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
This is something that's been said for a very long time, and there have been people who supported the proxy war in Syria who are celebrating the assassination of Sayyid Hassan, and even taking Arabs have been doing this and flaunting every Hizb casualty and mocking the deaths of Hizb soldiers. But were it not for for Hezbollah intervening in Syria, we would not be able to say that Gaza would survive as long, or Hezbollah would be able to survive as long, because the axis of resistance is a collective that works together. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'm actually more confident that people are realizing what the Syria war was, and that it was a proxy war waged on behalf of U.S. interests in our region that did not succeed, and it did not succeed because of, namely, the Lebanese resistance.
And an interesting point, I wrote about this in a piece on the electronic intifada, but there was a really interesting interview that Rania Khalek, who we've had on this program several times, did with the veteran journalist Elijah Magnier about how Israel actually managed to carry out the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and or at least of the other senior commanders. And some of the reporting that's come out is that it had to do with their involvement in Syria, because by being in Syria, they were exposed to all the intelligence services and spooks, the Western spooks, including Israel, who were involved in the dirty war, you could call it, in Syria. But the way it was put in some of that reporting, and I think also Alistair Crook, the former British diplomat, talked about this on the Judge Napolitano show, is that for Hezbollah, they had to take that risk because otherwise the United States and Israel would have succeeded in basically letting ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra take over Damascus, which would have been a catastrophe for, for everyone in the region, to have another failed state after Libya and after Iraq and so on. So the question being not so much about, do people love or hate the government of Syria? People are always, I believe people are always entitled to rise up against their government. But as you said, it was a proxy war, and their intervention to stop the fall of Damascus to these US and Israeli proxies was ultimately what meant they were more exposed in terms of being able to be infiltrated. So there is even a connection to the Syria war to the tactical successes Israel had in recent weeks. I'm just reflecting some of the reporting I've read, but I think worth something we'll probably see more about in coming weeks.
Right.
Yeah. Just a few minutes left, Rokeya. Lebanon is a somewhat divided country. Nasrallah himself almost often addressed the party's opponents in his speeches. What's the mood like now? Do you think people in Lebanon are ready to resist yet another full-scale Israeli assault? Just today, there have still been attacks on Dahia around the south. What are people saying, kind of across the political class spectrum in Lebanon, as best you can assess?
I think even some of the Hezb's most staunch detractors have been surprised, and they've come out and said that, while we disagreed politically, he was a great figure and so. And I do think there is unity behind the assassination of Sayyid Hassan, because it's still something that is hard to believe because of how much he influenced our society as a whole, not just his political speeches, but his religious speeches as well that he would deliver oftentimes, and we would listen to. He was a part of the fabric of our society, and I do think that people are ready to stand up to Israel, because the Hizb of yesterday is not the Hizb of today. The Hizb of yesterday was strong, but now they're even more organized and ready to confront Israel. And I do believe that people, while they are mourning, the confidence has not been shot. The Hizb took a big hit with the communications attack and then the assassination of their commanders, namely Sayyid Hassan. But talking to people every day, you can see that flicker of hope and readiness for whatever is coming. And those that are staying are willing to stay until the very end. Because I want to reference something that Hassan Nadur, Professor Hassan Nadur, a Lebanese writer, his niece, Aman Nadur, was killed by Israel in the southern village of Majd al-Zoun. He said that even if the whole world abandons us, the war is ours and we will fight it tooth and nail. And that is where I think most people stand today here.
Well, that's it's very encouraging to hear, obviously. And Rokhaya, you are just a beacon of light. Is there anything that
Great
you wanted?
discussion. I'm so glad that they asked about Syria. I think that part was really important. I might try and remember to cut that out later. I do think that part is so important, and it's literally what I'm talking about all the time on here when I'm talking about, supporting resistance movements, supporting what weakens imperialism, support what benefits resistance, regardless of whether or not you agree with everything about that fucking group. Just like what they said, right? Like, at the end of the day, if US had been successful, if that proxy war had been successful in overthrowing the Syrian government, then things today would be very much different, for the worse, to be clear, for the worse. Israel is an important point of getting weapons all around to various parts of the resistance. US gaining control, US able to effect an overthrow of the Syrian government, replacing it with one that's